The air was crisp that Halloween night, as Mark, Emily, Jason, Sarah, and Alyssa wandered through the dimly lit streets of their suburban town. The buzz of alcohol coursed through their veins, and laughter echoed through the empty avenues as they celebrated Halloween like they had every year, with reckless abandon. They had finished trick-or-treating, and now the real fun had begun. Everyone was in costume. Jason was a zombie, Sarah a witch, Emily a vampire, and Alyssa dressed as Harley Quinn. Mark, however, had refused to dress up, saying it was too childish. Now he strutted ahead of the group with a swagger that reeked of beer and arrogance. They wandered deeper into the quieter part of town, where the rows of houses grew darker and the street lamps flickered ominously. A fog had settled over the area, casting long shadows as they moved. "Dude, check this out." Jason pointed toward a lone figure standing at the end of the street. It was a man, tall and broad, dressed in a white mask and dark jumpsuit. His silhouette was unmistakable. "Michael Myers," Sarah laughed, nudging Mark. "You scared?" Mark sneered, his bravado on full display. "That guy? What a loser," he scoffed, his voice slurred. "He's probably some dude trying to scare kids." Emily, who had been trying to enjoy the night without incident, felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Something about the way the man stood there, motionless, sent a chill down her spine. But Mark, always eager to prove his dominance, was already marching towards the figure. "Mark, don't!" Alyssa called after him, but it was too late. Mark stormed up to the man in the Michael Myers costume and shoved him roughly. "What's your problem, huh? Think you're some kind of horror movie freak?" His voice dripped with venom as he landed another shove, followed by a quick punch to the man's chest. The figure stumbled back but did not react. His mask, blank and expressionless, only seemed to fuel Mark's aggression. He landed another punch, this one harder. "Come on, freak, do something." "Mark, stop!" Emily rushed forward, grabbing his arm and pulling him away. "You're going to get us in trouble." The man in the mask didn't move. He just stood there, staring silently at them. For a moment, the group stood frozen, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the figure merely turned and walked away, vanishing into the fog. "Real tough guy," Mark muttered, wiping his knuckles, though his earlier bravado seemed to have faltered. The group, feeling the tension, decided to call it a night. As they made their way back toward town, an eerie silence settled over them. The festive spirit from earlier had died down, replaced by a creeping unease. A few blocks later, Jason turned to check on Mark, only to find him gone. "Wait, where's Mark?" Jason asked, his voice suddenly tight with fear. Everyone stopped. They scanned the fog-drenched streets, but Mark was nowhere to be seen. "He was right behind us," Sarah said, her voice quivering. "I swear he was." A sense of dread settled over the group as they called out his name, their voices echoing into the night. But there was no answer, just the oppressive silence. Emily's heart raced. "Maybe he just went off to piss or something," she said, trying to sound confident, though she felt a gnawing fear that something more sinister had happened. But as they walked back, hoping to find Mark somewhere nearby, strange things started happening. Alyssa swore she saw a shadow move in the alleyway. Jason heard footsteps behind them, but when he turned, no one was there. The further they walked, the worse the feeling got, like they were being followed, watched. Then, out of nowhere, a loud clang erupted from a nearby construction site. They all jumped, their nerves fraying with each step. The empty streets, usually so familiar, now felt alien, dangerous. Suddenly, Sarah screamed. A figure in a Michael Myers mask stepped out from the darkness, holding something in his hand. It was Mark's phone, smeared with blood. "What the hell?" Jason gasped, backing away. The man didn't speak. He just stood there, the same emotionless mask staring them down. Fear gripped Emily's chest, and without thinking, she bolted. The others followed suit, sprinting down the street, not daring to look back. They ran for blocks, their lungs burning, adrenaline pushing them forward until they reached an abandoned warehouse at the edge of town. Panting, they slipped inside, barricading the door behind them. The cold, damp air of the warehouse felt oppressive, and the distant sounds of Halloween festivities felt miles away. I think we lost him," Alyssa whispered, her voice shaking. But just as the words left her lips, the heavy footsteps echoed through the building. "He's here," Emily whispered, her hands trembling. The group scrambled, ducking behind old crates and rusted machinery. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate, as if their pursuer was toying with them. Emily could barely breathe, her body shaking with fear. She glanced at the others. Jason looked ready to bolt at any second. Sarah had tears streaming down her face, and Alyssa was clutching her phone in a death grip, trying to call the police. Suddenly, a loud crash reverberated through the warehouse. The figure in the Michael Myers mask had found them. He was inside. Panic surged through them. They scattered in different directions, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the vast, empty space. Emily darted toward a back exit, but it was locked. She felt trapped, like a rat in a maze. She could hear Jason's heavy breathing nearby, and then, a thud, followed by a scream. "Jason!" Emily cried out, but there was no answer. She wanted to run, to find him, but fear rooted her to the spot. The figure moved methodically, stalking each of them with terrifying precision. Emily crouched behind a pile of crates, trying to control her ragged breaths. She peeked out just in time to see Sarah being dragged into the shadows, her screams abruptly cut off. Emily's heart pounded so loudly she feared it would give her away. She glanced around frantically. Where was Alyssa? Where was Jason? Suddenly, a hand grabbed her wrist. She spun around, fists raised, but it was Alyssa, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. "We need to get out of here," Alyssa whispered. "Now." The two of them crept toward the far side of the warehouse, sticking to the shadows. The footsteps echoed closer, and Emily felt a cold sweat trickle down her spine. Finally, they spotted a small window, just big enough to crawl through. Alyssa went first, hoisting herself up and out. Emily followed, but as she climbed through the window frame, a hand grabbed her ankle. She screamed, kicking out with all her strength. The grip tightened, pulling her back into the warehouse. But then, Alyssa grabbed her arms, pulling her the rest of the way through. Together, they tumbled onto the cold pavement outside. They didn't stop running until they reached the safety of a nearby gas station. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they stumbled inside, gasping for air. The attendant gave them a curious look, but said nothing. They huddled together, shaking with fear, as Alyssa dialed the police. Minutes later, the wail of sirens filled the night air. The police searched the warehouse, but there was no sign of the masked figure. Jason and Sarah were missing, and despite a thorough search, they were never found. Emily and Alyssa sat in the back of a police car, their minds racing, their bodies trembling. As they were being driven to the station, Emily's phone buzzed. A text message. It was from Mark's number. "We're not finished yet." Emily's blood ran cold as she stared at the screen. The message was followed by an image. Mark, standing in the same mask in front of a house. Her house. The nightmare wasn't over, and it was coming for her next. Cassie had always loved Halloween. The crisp autumn air, the crunch of leaves beneath her feet, the sight of children in costumes. It was all magical to her. So, when her neighbors, the Thompsons, asked her to house-sit for the weekend while they went out of town, she eagerly agreed. Watching over their cozy home and handing out candy seemed like the perfect way to spend her Halloween evening. By 7 p.m., the streets were buzzing with activity. Cassie sat near the front door with a large bowl of candy, greeting trick-or-treaters with a smile. Superheroes, witches, and ghosts streamed up to the house, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood. The Thompsons' house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by woods on two sides. It was peaceful during the day, but as night began to fall, the shadows seemed to grow longer, and the house felt a little too isolated for comfort. By 9 p.m., the streets had emptied, and Cassie figured it was time to call it a night. She switched off the porch light, set the bowl of leftover candy aside, and locked the door. She was about to settle in for a movie when a soft knock echoed through the house. Cassie froze, glancing at the clock. It was 9:30 p.m., way too late for trick-or-treaters. Hesitant, she walked to the door and peeked through the peephole. Standing on the porch was a figure dressed in a long black cloak, a white mask covering their face. The mask was simple but unnerving, with empty eyes and a wide, featureless smile. Her heart skipped a beat. "Trick-or-treating is over," she called through the door, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The figure didn't respond. They just stood there, unmoving. Cassie backed away, feeling her pulse quicken. Something was off. She waited for the figure to leave, but after a few moments, another knock came, louder this time. Her instincts screamed at her to stay inside, but curiosity got the better of her. She opened the door just a crack. "Look, Halloween's over." But the porch was empty. The figure was gone. Cassie blinked, confused. There was no way they could have disappeared that fast. She stepped outside, glancing around, but the street was completely still. A gust of wind rustled the leaves, and she shivered, quickly retreating back inside and locking the door. She settled onto the couch, trying to shake the eerie feeling, but something didn't feel right. There was a faint scratching sound from the window across the room. Her breath caught in her throat as she slowly turned to look. Nothing. Just her reflection staring back at her from the dark glass. But as she stood up to check, she noticed something strange on the porch. A jack-o'-lantern sat there, grinning at her with its jagged, uneven teeth. Cassie hadn't put it there. She hadn't carved a pumpkin at all. Her skin prickled with unease as she crept to the window. She peered outside, but the porch was empty, aside from the mysterious pumpkin. She swallowed hard, backing away, her heart racing. Just a prank, she told herself. Someone messing with her. But when she turned, her blood ran cold. The figure in the cloak was standing just outside the sliding glass door in the kitchen, their mask gleaming in the dim light. They were watching her. Cassie's legs froze, her mind racing. Was this still a joke, or had something more sinister begun? Her phone. She darted across the room to grab it, but as she did, the lights in the house flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. Panic surged through her. Cassie fumbled with her phone, using its faint glow to guide her. The figure was gone from the sliding door, but now the sound of footsteps echoed from the back of the house. Someone, or something, was inside. She dialed 911 with trembling hands. "Please, I need help," she whispered into the phone, her voice barely audible. "Someone's in the house." "Stay calm," the operator replied. "Officers are on their way. Are you alone?" "Yes," Cassie whispered, tears welling up in her eyes as the footsteps grew louder. She could hear the soft thud of boots on the hardwood floor, moving closer to where she stood. She hung up and crouched low, hiding behind the kitchen island. The footsteps paused just outside the kitchen, and then a door creaked open. Whoever was in the house was searching for her. Cassie held her breath, inching toward the back door. If she could just make it outside, maybe she could hide in the woods until the police arrived. Her heart pounded in her ears as she moved, her shoes barely making a sound on the cold floor. But as she reached the door, she realized her mistake. The door was locked, and the keys were on the kitchen counter, a creak behind her. Cassie spun around, eyes wide, just in time to see the figure standing in the hallway, their mask gleaming in the pale moonlight. Without thinking, she bolted, racing toward the front door. She could hear them behind her, the heavy thud of boots gaining on her. Her hands fumbled with the lock, and just as she yanked the door open, a gloved hand grabbed her shoulder. She screamed, wrenching herself free and sprinting out into the yard. The woods loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, but it was her only chance. She ran into the trees, branches slashing at her arms and legs as she pushed deeper into the forest. The sound of footsteps followed her, relentless, but she didn't dare look back. Her lungs burned as she sprinted down the narrow path, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Suddenly, the path ended in a small clearing. Cassie stopped, her heart pounding in her chest. She was trapped. The figure appeared at the edge of the trees, their masks still expressionless, but somehow more terrifying in the moonlight. They took a step toward her, then another, slowly closing the distance between them. Cassie's mind raced. She needed to do something, anything to stop them. Her eyes darted around the clearing, searching for a weapon, but there was nothing. The figure raised a hand, and for a moment, everything went silent. Then, from the direction of the house, sirens blared. Cassie's heart leapt as blue and red lights flashed through the trees. The figure hesitated, their head tilting slightly as if considering their next move. Then, without a word, they turned and disappeared into the shadows of the woods. Cassie collapsed to the ground, her body shaking with relief. She had survived. The police found her minutes later, her clothes torn and her face streaked with tears. They searched the house and the woods but found no sign of the masked figure. No footprints, no evidence of forced entry. It was as if they had never been there. Cassie spent the rest of the night at the police station, giving her statement, but deep down, she knew that whoever, or whatever, had stalked her that night wasn't finished. And as she sat in the cold, sterile room, she couldn't shake the feeling that next Halloween, they would return. It was Halloween night when 5 friends, Alex, Kate, Max, Lisa, and Danny, gathered at the edge of town, standing before the infamous Blackthorn Manor. The house had long been the subject of dark rumors and local legends, said to be cursed after a family mysteriously vanished decades ago. Its towering, crumbling facade loomed over them, cloaked in shadow, with shattered windows that resembled soulless eyes watching their every move. "We really doing this?" Kate asked, her voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Come on, it's just an old house," Alex scoffed, the self-appointed leader of the group. He adjusted the strap of his backpack filled with drinks and Halloween candy. "We're here to party, not scare ourselves over some dumb ghost stories." Max, the skeptic, chimed in. "Yeah, and if there are ghosts, we'll just invite them for a drink." The others laughed, though a nervous energy crackled in the air. They had heard the tales, strange disappearances, ghostly sightings, and bizarre occurrences that had plagued anyone foolish enough to enter Blackthorn Manor. But tonight, they were determined to prove the legends wrong, or at least have some fun trying. They pushed open the creaking gate, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. The front door stood ajar, as if waiting for them. The moment they stepped inside, an oppressive chill settled over the group. The air smelled stale, like mildew and decay, and the only sound was the muffled echo of their footsteps on the wooden floorboards. "This place gives me the creeps," Lisa muttered, glancing around nervously. Her grip on Danny's arm tightened. Danny, always the joker, pulled out his phone and started playing spooky sound effects. "Perfect ambiance, right?" he grinned. They found the grand hall at the center of the house, its ceiling high and ornate, though dust and cobwebs covered everything. A cracked chandelier dangled precariously above them. The group dropped their bags, pulled out drinks, and set up a Bluetooth speaker. Music blared, filling the eerie silence of the manor. For the first hour or so, everything seemed normal. They drank, laughed, and danced, their voices bouncing off the empty walls. But as the night wore on, the atmosphere began to shift. It started small, a gust of wind that rattled the windows even though there were no open windows or doors. The music would stutter, like someone was messing with the speaker. And then, the door they had come through, the front door, slammed shut on its own. "Did someone close that?" Kate asked, her brow furrowed. "No way," Alex said, shaking his head. "It's probably just the wind." But the unease in the room grew. Max, standing near the hallway that led deeper into the house, caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of his eye, a shadow that moved, even though no one was there. "Hey, did you guys see that?" Max asked, stepping closer to the hall. His voice faltered, the bravado from earlier now gone. "See what?" Lisa asked, nervously looking around. Max pointed to the hallway. "I swear, something just moved down there." Alex, always the skeptic, grabbed a flashlight from his bag. "I'll go check it out. It's probably nothing." Reluctantly, the group followed him down the dark corridor. The air grew colder, and their footsteps echoed ominously. The flashlight beam bounced along the walls, illuminating peeling wallpaper and old family portraits with faces that seemed to follow them as they walked by. At the end of the hall, they reached a heavy wooden door. Alex pushed it open, revealing what looked like a study. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with dusty, forgotten tomes. In the middle of the room was a grand piano, covered in a thick layer of dust. But it was the chair in front of the piano that caught their attention. It was rocking gently, as if someone had just been sitting there. "Okay, now that's weird," Danny admitted, glancing nervously at the others. Before they could react, the piano keys suddenly smashed down, playing a discordant, jarring tune. Everyone jumped back, startled. Lisa gasped, clutching Danny's arm tightly. "Who's there?" Alex called out, his voice trembling despite his efforts to sound tough. There was no answer, only the creak of the rocking chair, now eerily still. "We need to get out of here," Kate whispered, panic rising in her voice. But just as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. Max rushed to open it, but it wouldn't budge. "Are you kidding me?" Max cursed, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't give. "We're trapped in here." Then they heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, like the distant sound of someone speaking through the walls. It grew louder, more insistent, as if voices were surrounding them. The temperature in the room plummeted, their breaths visible in the cold. "Who's doing this?" Lisa cried out, her eyes wide with terror. Without warning, the door flung open on its own. The group didn't hesitate. They bolted back down the hall, their footsteps frantic. As they ran, shadows danced along the walls, moving faster than the beam of Alex's flashlight could follow. "Where's Danny?" Kate shouted as they reached the grand hall again. They all stopped, turning around to find that Danny was no longer with them. "He was right behind me," Lisa cried, her face pale with fear. "We have to find him." The music from their speaker was still playing, but it had become distorted, eerie, like a slowed-down version of the Halloween soundtrack. Alex shut it off, plunging the house into silence. "We need to leave, now," Max said, his voice trembling. "Danny can take care of himself. We have to go before—" A loud crash interrupted him, followed by a scream. Danny's scream. It came from upstairs. "That's him," Lisa said, starting toward the staircase, but Alex grabbed her arm. "No, wait! We can't just rush up there. What if it's not? What if it's something else?" "We can't leave him!" Lisa cried. But before they could decide, the chandelier above them shook violently, as though an unseen force had grabbed it. It swayed back and forth, the sound of metal screeching echoing through the hall. "Move!" Alex shouted, pulling the others back just as the chandelier crashed to the ground, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Panic set in. They ran toward the front door, but it wouldn't open. No matter how hard they pulled or kicked, the door refused to give. "We're trapped," Kate sobbed, backing away from the door. "We're trapped in this house." The whispers returned, louder this time, surrounding them from all sides. Shadows flickered across the walls, moving in unnatural ways, as if the very house itself was alive. "Upstairs!" Alex shouted. "We can try the windows in one of the bedrooms!" Reluctantly, the group ran up the grand staircase, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. The upstairs hallway was just as dark and foreboding as the rest of the house. The doors along the corridor were closed, but one stood slightly ajar. Danny's scream had come from that room. "Don't go in there," Max warned, his voice shaky. "Whatever took him is in there." But Lisa, driven by desperation, shoved the door open. Inside, the room was pitch black, save for the faint outline of a figure in the corner. Danny. He was standing still, his back to them, facing the wall. "Danny," Lisa whispered, stepping into the room. There was no response. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. As Lisa approached him, the figure in the corner turned slowly. It was Danny, but his face was contorted in fear, his eyes wide with terror. And behind him, emerging from the shadows, was something else. A dark figure, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Lisa screamed, and the door slammed shut behind her, trapping her inside with whatever had taken Danny. The others pounded on the door, but it wouldn't open. "Lisa!" Kate cried. "We have to help her!" But it was too late. The screams inside the room abruptly stopped, and the whispers returned, louder and more sinister than before. Alex grabbed Max and Kate. "We need to get out of here, now! This place, it's not letting us leave." They ran down the hall, trying every door and window, but nothing would open. The house seemed to shift around them, the walls closing in, trapping them like prey in a hunter's lair. By the time they reached the grand hall again, only Alex and Kate remained. "This house, it's alive," Kate whispered, her voice filled with dread. "It's playing with us." Just as they reached the front door, it slowly creaked open. But standing in the doorway was a figure, shrouded in darkness, wearing a mask of shadows. "Run!" Alex shouted, pulling Kate with him. But the figure stepped forward, and the house around them seemed to groan in satisfaction, as if it had finally caught its prey. The last thing Kate saw before the darkness consumed them was the faint, twisted smile of the shadowed figure. And then, silence. The legend of Blackthorn Manor had claimed more victims that night, and as the years passed, the stories of the house only grew darker. The friends were never seen again. their fate sealed within the walls of the cursed manor. For Blackthorn Manor was not just haunted, it was hungry, and on Halloween night it always found a way to feast.